Just a little bit about myself. My name is Pat Dirkse. I moved to Southern California 20 years ago to come be an intern at this church and to go to Fuller Seminary. I thought that at the time that my wife and I would come have a Southern California experience. 4 years later, head back to the Midwest where we're both from, both grew up in Wisconsin, and here we are, you know. So we fell in love with the beauty and brokenness of the city. We love the complexity of it. We love getting to be somehow part of the solution, but never fully the answer of these things, and yet we find a lot of meaning along the way. So it was 11 years ago we planted City Church of Compton. So my commute, as Charlie was saying, was short. It is just down the Rosecrans, so I'm 10, 12 minutes away. And so it's good to be with you. We planted City Church of Compton with the conviction that a city's transformed from the inside out, so we wanted to come, live among our neighbors. You feel like you are motivated to bring about change in a different place when you feel the same injustice as they do. And so we have found it a pure joy to be a part of the city of Compton. We feel like we need it a lot more than it needs us. And it's been good. I'm also grateful for Manna, grateful for their vision, their investment that they give to people. And I want us to maybe spend some time today. I'm not going to speak at you for a really long time because I want it to be more interactive. I want you to push back. You know, might feel like the thought maybe is a little different. You can be like the Bereans and be like, I don't know about that. You know, and that'd be all good, right, along the way. Because I think everyone's here because you've received some capital of some kind. Is that right? You feel like there's been some type of investment that's been given to you. And I think that's a little bit what I want to talk about today, is to feel like let's look at capital. And when you hear capital, what do you think of when you think of capital? Money. No delay. There we go. Anything else?
More money.
Yeah, money.
Relationship.
Relationship. Okay.
Just like the phrase relational capital.
Okay.
Opens the door.
Opens the door. Okay. What about if I moved it to currency? What would you think if you heard currency versus capital? When you hear currency, what do you think of?
Provision.
Provision. Yeah.
Thinking of ways to acquire it.
Different ways to acquire it. Yeah.
Ways that currency is not just money, but currency is relationships. Currency is material facilities. All that. That's currency because it's a plus.
Yeah.
What we're doing for the kingdom.
Yep. Good. I mean, tonight is the NFL draft. Anyone excited about the NFL draft tonight?
What are we doing?
I mean, well, I figured this group was here early because you wanted to be at the draft tonight. Like, oh, I got a lunch or a dinner. I'm going to see the draft tonight. And
Wait, are you teaching?
I am.
I'll bet James says, let's go.
Yeah, right. We'll see what he really got. He had an eye problem. I just can't see coming, you know. And so part of that is tonight is there's a lot of kids. You feel like you're older because you call them kids now, who feel like their dreams are to come true, right? There's going to be 32 people in the first round that will get selected. And from 2 years ago, if they get any type of money like they previously did, those first picks will get somewhere between 10 million and 46 million before they even play a game. Pretty good, right? And does it feel like if you got that, you made it? Would it feel like, man, I'm set? Would you feel that way? I mean, maybe you would, maybe not. And you start to just feel like, hey, this is something that we want to start looking at. I think it's Warren Buffett, if you want to talk about money, is someone, he said that don't invest in something that you don't understand. Which for me, it's like, why don't do cryptocurrency. They don't understand it at all. Like, well, and it's like, if you don't understand it, don't do it. But it seems like Jesus might talk about the same thing for living the good life. Do you know how to live the good life? And if you don't know how to invest in it, you better find out the understanding so that you can give your time and energy towards getting a return that seems favorable. And so I think part of it is going to feel like, I want to look at what does the good life look like. If we want to begin to feel like not only how do I invest my own life to reflect the good life, but if you want to make disciples in your setting, if you want to raise people up in your own setting, you need to know how to invest in them to hope to see a return of some kind, right? And so let me just look at, some of you shouted these out already. I mean, so there's like, there's finances. Or I'll say financial capital, right? So if you look at financial capital, the currency we would probably understand is probably the most simple one to understand. It is where we'd get dollars and cents, right? It's money. It gets to feel like, this is, you look at a budget, you try to understand things, it tends to be measured in dollars and cents. And so financial capital, you can quickly look and go, I got it, or you can be like, I don't got it, right? It's like money clip's empty, don't have it currently right now. But it's measured in dollars and cents. There might feel the affirmation or the disappointment when your bank statement shows up. For yourself, for the church, whatever, and to feel like, all right, here's financial capital. And that's oftentimes measured in dollars and cents. We can also look at intellectual capital. Intellectual capital. And this currency tends to be in a place of ideas, right? It comes from your creativity that you begin to have. Oftentimes it is knowledge and ideas, it's your intellect, it's your skill set, it's the competencies you begin to have. And so part of it is like, hey, what type of intellectual capital do you begin to have? It's organizational strategies you begin to run, it's jobs you may have had already, it's why we, maybe spend some money to go to school. It's because you want to grow on more of the intellectual capital along the way. And then next one I want to look at is physical. Physical capital is oftentimes the measurement of this is time and energy, right? And so the time and energy we begin to have gets to be shaped around, what is the hours of the day that you have, which everyone gets the exact same, right? Everyone gets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No one gets more than that. But I think where it changes is what is the energy you begin to have to give, or what is the health you begin to have so that you can do that. You may be able to work faster, harder, longer, whatever, because it's shaped around some of the health you begin to have versus someone who doesn't have it. All right, you tracking with me? Yeah. All right, good. Then we have relational capital. Relational capital is oftentimes shaped by, or the currency we would begin to find is friends and family, right? Do you know somebody? Do you have friends? Have you developed more friends in an area? And so oftentimes the currency we begin to look at is, do we have friends? Do we have family? Do we have people that we can begin to connect with that way? And then I'm going to talk about each one of these a little bit more, but then also you have spiritual capital. And spiritual capital is measured in power and wisdom. I think that is the currency of spiritual capital. It gets to be measured in power. Oftentimes we see Jesus showing up in power, right? And also in wisdom. Wisdom, I think, is, people sometimes say, like when knowledge and love kiss, you begin to have wisdom. Here's something that comes together. It's not just knowing what to do about it, but or how it works, but what should we do? Gets to feel like some of the wisdom that gets to show up in these areas. And so part of it we begin to look at is to feel like this is what we call the 5 capitals. And part of how I began to put them up on the board feels as if it is the order of importance we begin to have, starting with spiritual, finishing with financial capital. Now you may look at this and go, I don't know if I agree with your list, which is great, because if we disagree, it's going to be more fun today. And part of what we begin to see is people, sometimes have shirts that are made and say things like God over money, right? Which I'd say, I agree. God seems to be over money, or people over profit. You might hear that of some of your workplace that you go to, and people talk about, what does this look like, right? And I would tend to say that every time we begin to make our way up along the way, the value increases by 10%. I'm just feeling like, just out of a lived experience, feel like it seems like every time we move up, it feels like the value keeps going up higher as well. Which, yes, you're right. What I am saying is the easiest one to attain is financial capital. Even though we're all here and I'm with you, it feels like, hey, it seems like financial capital is also challenging. But this is the most difficult one to get, and we'd say this is the easiest one to get. Now, to talk a little bit about the order that we look at, right? I mean, I think this is where we sometimes want to give an investment, and when you give an investment, you many times want to trade up. Is that true? Yeah, and so you're oftentimes looking at like, how do I trade up? So if anyone paid for any, schooling, or even if you're still paying for your schooling, I want to say to you, hey, you were trading financial capital for intellectual capital. So you were trading up. You were feeling like, hey, this is gonna, if I get more concepts, ideas, creativity, I'm gonna be able to trade on that in the future. It's gonna be a good return. Now, some of us might go, why did you put physical capital ahead of intellectual capital? I'm not sure if I like that, especially when you have people who have received quite a bit of education in the room. And I think part of what I would just say at this is if you have a migraine headache, right, and your health is not well, it's hard to think or go to your job. If you have COVID, you can't show up at a meeting. It feels like if you have the health spot, hey, even though you may have things around your intellectual capital, it feels like your physical capital would be higher. When it's time to get a job, and you spent all this money on school, and then you find out the real thing is, it's not what I know, it's who you know. Which feels like this gets to be the trade up, right? It feels like who you know is more important than what you know. And then to feel like, hey, there's this spot of how do we begin to gain the capital of these things? We're going to talk a little bit more too of like, how do you gain the capital? How do we gain, even if we're talking spiritual capital? It seems like Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount finishes with how you begin to gain more spiritual capital, which is that you're not just someone who's attaining more information, but you get to be someone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice as like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. And when Jesus gets done, they go, wow, here's someone who speaks with authority. Now, where did the authority come from? The authority came from repenting and believing. The authority came from hearing what the Father does and going and doing it. And so part of where we begin to get more spiritual capital is by living in this constant rhythm of repenting and believing. Now I want to look at a passage, and I'm not going to even read the whole thing because I got to do the barbecue last time at your previous event. I walked in 2 times. I heard Mark talking 2 times of the passage out of Matthew 25, which I think is great around investment. And since you're all scholars in this room, and you know the story, part of it is just the paraphrase, right? Someone want to give a paraphrase? This is the parable of the talents. How many people? Three. Do they all get the same amount? No. What do they get? According to their ability. There we go. This is a good group. This is a good group. And so one got 5, one got 3, one got 1. True? Yep. And the master gives them each talents, goes away, and as he goes away, he comes back and expects a return. As he comes back for a return, he finds that the first person begins to invest and doubles it. Well done, right? The second one does the same thing, gives an investment. Well done. Last one, sad part of the story, right? Doesn't do anything with it, sits on it. Master becomes angry. It feels like, hey, you should at least should have done something with it. Put it at the bank, try to get a little bit of interest on it. I mean, I know the inflation's high and interest rates are low, but you should have at least done that, right? You could have had some type of return. And I think what I'm sometimes challenged with when I read the scriptures is who Jesus holds up as the heroes and who he holds up as villains. I mean, like the unlikely hero, right? Good Samaritan. It would feel like an oxymoron to say that those things together is to say, like, if you said Samaritan, you would have felt like it can't be good. And yet in the story, it's the Good Samaritan. It's a hero, an unlikely hero along the way. And I think many times our family just this week went to go watch the movie Bad Guys. Anyone see the previews for Bad Guys? So the Bad Guys, I won't give the movie away because it's a great kids movie, but Bad Guys is simply looking at characters that you would expect to be bad. So it's a fox, it's a wolf, it's a shark, it's a piranha, it's a spider, and they carry a reputation of being the bad guys, right? And I think for me, growing up in the church, I had an expectation of who the bad people were. The bad people were the ones who, too much drugs, promiscuous lifestyle. Hey, these are the bad people in the story. And yet, sometimes you find unlikely villains along the way. Unlikely people that you read the story and you're like, ooh, yikes. Seemed like this person was a pretty okay dude, right? And I feel like this sometimes challenges me because I can think that, surely I wouldn't be a villain in the story. And then on MLK Day, as it's been the tradition in the last few years, is to listen to the letter from Birmingham jail and to grieve the fact that Dr. King would say, it is the white moderate that I'm most disappointed in. And to feel like, oh, you had an opportunity, I thought you were with us, and yet you never spoke up. And to feel like, I think I find myself in that story. I'm wondering if I'm maybe the villain who never thought I would have been. I'm a church guy, I went to seminary, right? It's like, and yet I feel like we get this story and we sometimes find, boy, the villain of the story is the one who does nothing with it. Now, here's the fun part. You all receive something, or will receive. I'm not sure last time you received a portion of some of your capital along the way. And there's this call to invest in it. And I think as I have gotten to know Charlie and know James, I think they share some of the same heart of what's here. And it's the same heart we begin to see that it is your desire to see you attempt to do something with it. I wonder if the only disappointment will be not doing anything at all. Like, if I read the text, if the master comes back and he's like, hey, I was going cryptocurrency, I hit it the wrong day, I lost it all, And if it felt like that's what he was supposed to go after, he's not the villain of the story. He actually is someone who gave it a good go, right? If that was your best shot and then it didn't work, okay. Because the part that I'm encouraged with is we're told that you should seek first the kingdom, right? That's spiritual capital. And all of these things will be added. So if you have the right bullseye, then other things get to be added along the way. I mean, the Trappist monks who inspire me because I love, people. I've done barbecue, and it feels like the Trappist monks have learned to live in both marketplace and ministry. And they have created some of the best bread and honey and beer that we still drink today. But one of the things they would say is the goal is to aim beyond the target. That if you aim for financial capital, you're going to miss it. And when they talk about aiming beyond the target, it's really what Jesus says in Matthew 6:33. And really, we begin to find that the call is to seek first the kingdom, which means God cares less about your accuracy and more about your desire of what to go after. And so if the last servant felt like he was seeking after it but completely missed, you still would have hit it. Because accuracy is the main thing. It's seeking after the kingdom. And so I want us to just to look at some of these, and maybe I'll get a little feedback here in a minute from you, but it feels like, there's some great takeaways from that passage. We can begin to find the master entrusts his capital. He sends it to everybody, right? Everybody gets to play. Differing amounts according to their capability, but everyone gets to play. It's this empowering aspect, and we know he's empowering because he doesn't micromanage the entire thing from beginning to end. But there is high accountability and low control. High accountability, I will come back. Low control, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Right? Which is part of what you all got to receive. It wasn't just this one track. Everyone's got different ideas, different ways to begin to expand the kingdom. And so we begin to see everyone gets to play along the way. And then there's celebration when there's a return. It's not about the amount you start with, but it's what you end up with later. Right? It's not what you start with. The celebration comes with what did you do with it. I think John Wooden said, don't measure your success by what you've accomplished, but by what you should have accomplished. It's like, hey, we won by 1. Yeah, but you should have won by 20. You're way better than this. And then there's this support and accountability. We're looking for a return, but also to feel like, hey, what does it look like to come back and get a response along the way? Now, we talked a little bit about some of these, right? And I would say that oftentimes how kind of the institution works or the world works is you figure out what something costs, right? And then you start building that. And it feels like how the kingdom works is you listen to what the Father's saying, and after you hear what the Father's saying, then if he's calling you to it, he probably wants to help you figure out how to provide for it along the way. And I just want to say, hey, we can talk about the draft that's happening, today. And to say, if you were going to look at the 5 capitals, and I can, maybe number these along the way. And if you were looking at the NFL draft, NBA draft, MLB, it doesn't matter, pro sports, what would be the 5 capitals in the world that they live in? What might be number 1? Physical capital, right? Are you a freak athlete, right? Is your health is probably like the number 1 thing. What else? Number 2?
Relational or intellectual.
Yeah? People can push. I'm not saying I have the answer. Financial?
You got to afford that.
Yeah, it's like, right? I mean, it's like Samuel Debo, right? He's dang good. But the time's now. My window's going to get real short. Athletic, top of the NFL, you know, I got to get paid. There's another thing. Relational, intellectual, yeah. I think it cares. People matter what team they're playing on, or at least they do in time. Spiritual, we probably guessed at the bottom, to be fair. I mean, should we pick a different one? I mean, it's the world maybe my brother lives in. He's in investments, so financial investments, you know, mid-cap, small-cap funds. So if you're looking at someone who's in the financial world, intellectual, yeah, might be intellectual, financial. Feel like, all right, you need to know what you're doing. I just don't want to give my money to anybody. But the next thing I'm going to expect a return that comes from there. Yeah, maybe relational. Who are we going to connect with, right? And I think we can sometimes look at, now we held up pro athletes, and not many of us know many along the way, or any. But we probably know that person who's been in our church, who's been a part of your family, who felt like, I just got a job offer, but that job offer is out of the county or out of the state, and it seems like such a great opportunity for our family because it's going to allow our kids to go to a better school, and it's going to allow us to get into a bigger house, and it feels like we might be able to take better vacations. And so they take their family and they move from Southern California to whatever, Texas, Tennessee. Yeah, it's like you all know the story. You could fill in you could fill in where it is. And as they do, they get there and feel like, boy, this work is more demanding than I thought it was. And it seems like I got my kids running to sporting event and school, and I'm working longer hours, and I can't be home, and I'm not connecting much with my spouse anymore. And it doesn't take long before you feel really frustrated because you feel like you made this choice because it had so much promise, only to feel like it didn't give us the things we were desiring. See some people shaking their heads. You either know the story or live the story. And it feels like intuitively, we tend to know these things or feel these things, but it's also like, do we live our life to trade up? Do we begin to invest so we can move up?
What would it look like?
Yeah, no, push back, ask questions.
What would it look like? I understand the investing to trade up for most of them. I'm trying to put my head around what would it look like investing intellectually to trade up to physical, or intellectually to trade up to even relational.
Yeah. So I think part of it too, right? You're looking to move up. So we'll talk like, how do we start giving more of an investment of these things along the way? Let me just say it a different way too first before I get to that. Is a typical question in our culture is to say, what are you going to, when you're maybe in high school or college or wherever, what are you going to do when you're done, right? The question is always what? It was rarely, who are you going to go with? Which is really, if you're, a covenantal question, is who are you going to go with on the journey that you're on? Every one of us wonder that right away, right? Want to plant a church. First question is like, well, who's my core team? I need to go with some people. We know that we want to have some people. I think trading up is like, hey, do I want to, financially, I should join a gym. That seems like a health option for us. Jesus lives this great rhythm of health because he observes the Sabbath each week. And so there's this way of, beginning to respond to the Sabbath. And so maybe for us, it's like, do I want to trade some of my, financial capital to begin to feel like this is a good way for us to rest or enjoy each other. For us, our family, it's been buying Knott's Berry Farm passes. It's like, all right, we need to leave our yard to rest because there's always interruptions in our yard. So let's go to Knott's. It's relaxing. We enjoy it. It's also relational. It's family time that we get to spend. And we homeschool, so you always go on the days it's not busy. So there's no yelling at each other at the end of the day. It's like 2 hours. All right, good, let's go home. But it feels like, hey, how do we trade up? It might be too like, hey, different ways that, what does your investment look like to move up? So it's investing in a spiritual director, investing in a coach, investing in someone feels like you're trading financial capital for spiritual capital. It's a way to move up, right? How do we begin to move up along the way?
One thing I think of with intellectual to physical is a lot of the outreach activities we do, we generally at least try to think about it afterwards. Can we do it better?
Yeah.
And I know that's helped quite a bit because we're saying, smarter, not harder.
Yep.
I guess. So we've been able to do a lot more with less physical effort.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we feel like it's better just to put in a ton of physical effort, but we
Yeah.
can do it better and more efficiently.
Yep.
So I think that's a big part of that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Now, in your experience, when you do this, is this seasonal? Is this long-term? Because I'm thinking long-term and then making deposits. Like
Yep.
Every time you make a deposit in your financial and all the 5 steps there. So then what you're doing is you're thinking long-term and it's not just seasonal, because I know that we could get into a trap, right?
Yes.
Just thinking seasonal, that I'm going to do this just for a season, and then we neglect. And then when we neglect, then we have more pressure because we weren't doing it little by little.
Yeah.
So we have to make deposits. So in your experience, what have you done? Like, give me an example of what you have done, in relation to this.
Yes, it's a great question, which I think is a large part what we're looking at, right? So if the goal is to trade up, the easiest one to get is financial capital. And so it means that if we want to grow these other capitals, it's going to take more investment. How we tend to grow those investments is what we might call predictable patterns. What gets to be predictable patterns? What are your routines? What are your rhythms? If Jesus begins to talk about learn the unforced rhythms of grace, gets to feel like, hey, what are some of these rhythms we begin to take? And so again, it's good to trade up because it's a better investment. I'm not saying ignore these to just go after this one, right? To just go after spiritual. We need them all. I think, so if I just going to walk through, the 2 mistakes we oftentimes make with financial capital is we just think it's the main thing. Like, I coach and meet with planters over the last 10 years quite often, and there are some planters that at the end you're like, hey, how can I pray for you? And every week it's like, need to raise more money, which I get is a real request. We do need to raise money. Everyone needs to be a part of that. But it's like, it's the same thing. And it feels like that's your big bullseye. And so it's like, if this is the only thing we're looking at, we're not aiming beyond the target. Because how you cast vision is oftentimes, this is what God's saying and we're going after. Now people are more excited to be a part of that than just feeling like we set a budget at this and we're behind, right? And so it's like aim beyond the target. We see Jesus is the rabbi. He is the one who teaches. He's the one who brings instruction. He's the one who passes on information and creativity. And so we begin to see these things. We see that Jesus is the great example of how to live in this spot of physical capital. To know when to stay somewhere and when to go. That in Mark 1, when you see Jesus healing all night, and the disciples are so excited and they come back, they're like, the whole town's looking for you. And Jesus is like, let's go to the next village. Preach the gospel there. Okay, he's on a different time schedule. It seems like Jesus is taking the Sabbath. He's learning what it looks like to find rest. Come and go with me to the other side of the lake. We're on retreat, right? It gets to feel like that we're not just defined by our work. I love the quote I just saw was like, if work is your idol, then rest will feel like sin. And you're like, whoo. And
Can you never say that again?
Promise I won't be here next time. No. And so to feel like, hey, if Jesus is beginning to look at what it looks like to live in this good rhythm, you have relational capital. And relational capital feels like it is family and friends. Where's the hometown for Jesus? Capernaum. Was that where he grew up? No, it wasn't where he grew up. But that's where his people of peace were. And that's where, this is who are my mother and brother and sisters, right? It's people who do the will of God. So does Jesus own a house? No. But it seems like Jesus owns houses. He's got a home base in Capernaum. Every time he travels to Jerusalem, it's at Mary and Martha's house. Why? Because he's traded up. He's got relational capital there that he gets to join in with. And why? Because, he used spiritual capital. You heal Peter's mother-in-law, right? It's spiritual capital. And now it's like, hey, this is your home. Whatever you want. We see Peter walking down, right, Acts. And this gets to be a very common thing that, of the early church who seems to be doing the supernatural in a natural way. And as they do, it almost seems like a spot of frustration and where someone is crying out for help and the response is, silver and gold I do not have, but what I do have, I say to you, in the name of Jesus, get up, right? Which can feel like sometimes to make our exit and be like, spiritual capital I do not have, but yeah, here's $5. And you're like, do you want to trade up? And so I think part of it for us is looking at, hey, what does it look like to trade up? Not just, but also, if you want to live the good life, the commonwealth that you begin to have is you have all of these. And so if something's lacking, it's like, if it's true and like, hey, the one that truly is the least financial, well, good news, it's the easiest one to get and you have more capital up here, so you can trade down to get some. Invest more time in people, right? It's like, so a couple more examples and then let's go, let's hear from you first.
I love this concept here of taking these all into consideration. I know in kind of the work that we're doing, it's actually been a top to bottom, where, when you find out what God, it's like doing something with God instead of for Him.
Yep.
He takes you, I think we all have been taken into areas maybe we didn't know we'd be going to. And especially when it comes to, for us, going to those places where the church doesn't usually talk about, such as abortion or LGBTQ community, whatever it is. And starting where God's heart is. And then He starts to connect these. And it's almost like He starts, and it does go to, it's interesting, it does go to the relational first. Finding those people that help you be able to do what God's doing in your community. And then the physical. I don't have a lot of physical strength, but getting connected with people who not only relationally connect, but also physically have the ability to do the work.
Yeah.
And then it's amazing how when you get those people together, the intellectual power just goes crazy. And then somehow, whether it's manna or whoever, God then puts in that final piece. It is number 5, but it is important. And so it's almost, I see the trading up.
Yep.
But when you start at the up, then it's like He shows how He's going to, maybe not exactly in this order, but bring all that in. So it's maybe it's just, that's how my brain is working with this.
Yeah, and I think this is also too, like, so I want to give us first kind of the framework for us to look at, and then you go, well, this is how I know for myself of what I need to invest in my own life, right? Of how to begin to live into the 5 capitals. But if you're also going to invest in people in your community, which you do so much already, you might use this as a filter of how do I invest in some of these people in my community, right? So financial capital. Am I having people over, like am I buying meals, am I buying coffee? It's like I'm spending some dollars, right, for people. That's what it's going to take to invest people in your community. Are you passing along the information that you have given, right? So 2 Timothy 2:2, the good deposit you've received, you're passing on to others. So it's here are ideas, thoughts, understanding, physical. You begin to spend time. It's part of what you need to do. Is it shows up on your schedule. Here they are, relationally. It's talking together. It's meals, and then ultimately, it's like you're passing your wisdom on as well. And so it's like absolutely right. And we can sometimes ask, hey, the people in your community, what are they in need of from me? And you might see, they need time from me. Do they need someone to walk alongside them in this season?
And sometimes it's such a silent thing of what they need. It is that spiritual and relational that's so very important because,
Yeah.
If you're doing a bunch of stuff, but it's not hitting those deep needs.
Yeah.
They can show needs on the outside, but the
Mhm.
deep needs
Mhm.
inside, then you can miss a lot.
Yeah. Yep. I think just want to do 1 or 2 more things, and then maybe we'll give a 5-minute bathroom break and run back for some discussion as well. 2 things. One, this is how I see the capitals, and I think I've also wondered the opposite way. If this is what wealth looks like, would we use the same order if we saw it in the area of need or poverty? And it's like, do I really believe that if someone's without money, that's still the lowest one on the list? Yes. Do I feel like it's if you have no creativity, ideas, thoughts, boy, that seems like a spot of sadness and loneliness along the way. Physically, are we so maxed out in our schedule that we have no time? That everything's always full? They would say, I was going to ask you to go out, but I just know you're too busy. And it's like, well, there's health issues, dealing with people in our own community and their struggle of chronic illness and just how challenging that is. But also to feel too like we can never schedule something for debilitating, back pain and things that they have. You're like, boy, that seems hard. But man, wouldn't it be worse to have no family or friends? At least there's still a support structure that's there. And then even on top of that, do we believe the greatest poverty anyone could experience is to never know Jesus? And you're like, well, that seems like you're broke, right? That'd be tough. And so sometimes I think the other way of looking at it from that point of view, or to be a little bit more lighthearted, would feel like next week I'm going on vacation. And when I look at this on vacation, sometimes I can be like, spending money, But when I spend money, it's going, but I'm going to get space to read that book that I've been waiting to read and listen to a couple more podcasts I didn't have time for. I'm going to take a nap in the afternoon. That sounds amazing, right? I'm going to sleep in, no alarm. It's going to eat good food, get to feel like, hey, there's this spot of physical. I get to go with my family. So it's extended time during the day. This is an investment we begin to receive. I also hope, get up, walk with Jesus, spend some time in the cool of the day, relaxing, but also connecting. And it feels like what I sometimes used to look at vacations and go, oh man, it's expensive. Now it's like, I get to trade up for everything I do on vacation. It's a good investment. So it's like, all right, it's a good investment to feel like to buy someone a lunch that you've wanted to get together with. Because it's like, it's just physical, some financial capital to go and sit down with somebody, to be with them, to create a new friend, But I asked about pro sports. I asked about, the financial world. What I didn't ask about is, what does the average church look for in the area of these capitals? Or when you were being called as a pastor to that church, what were they looking for? Typically it starts with, to be able to preach the gospel might be something up there, right? Which might be like, can they give some great concepts and ideas, right? We want to be a growing church. Can more people show up? We're hoping that that would take place. I laid my cards out before we even started. I should have asked the question to you.
I had been interviewing a lot of places before I landed at Nana, and I was always so surprised, and it was all with churches, right? To be a pastor of some sort, whether it's lead, associate, youth, children's, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And no joke, several, we didn't even touch the spiritual part.
Yep.
They didn't even check to make sure I understood the gospel. Didn't talk with me about my rhythms of time with Jesus and how I spent my time, and it's just so fascinating because I'm like, that's
Right.
should start there.
Yeah.
Right.
I actually, so at some point I'll end up hanging out with all of you, but my first experience in ministry, I wasn't even a Christian, and I was leading a children's program at a church.
There you go.
And I didn't even believe.
Wow.
They didn't ask because they saw me doing something on stage somewhere, and they're like, "Oh, you should come lead this."
It's
at our
good.
church."
Yeah.
And God used it.
Yes.
But it's funny. I don't think
Yeah.
their intent was my life in ministry.
Yeah.
Well, we can, in smaller churches, though, we can get pretty desperate for workers that.
It's true.
Someone
Yep.
with a little bit of skill set, they do start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you available? We're looking for anyone available,
Yes.
right?
Are you available? That's what we're
Yeah. Yeah. Things might show up, maybe not initially, but we want to do this building campaign.
Right.
How well are you at raising funds, right?
Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
financial. I'm sure your churches are way better, but this is just what I've heard from other people along the way.
I think last time we were together, Mark, when he was sharing about that book he had written, but I think so many of these things like relational, physical, I think especially, I think sometimes as a church, we only think of physical in the context of the financial. So in other words, I want butts and chairs, basically.
Right.
So that way they're a giving unit.
Yeah.
God help us to call people that.
Yeah.
But that, I think we think of them only from the financials. So we're almost like, we're pulling everything down, I guess, in your scale, which I like seeing it this way, as opposed to thinking this is the most important thing. They're here to receive the gospel. I'm not thinking about, I don't see a dollar sign.
Yeah.
I see a person in a chair. How sad that is, because that's the lowest
Yeah.
chart.
Yeah. It's good. Well, we're going to do a little exercise. Two more back you, two back here. Very good. But yes, I am with you on these were part of some of my get you one too. Individual, yep. I think everyone's got a pen at the table, so. But yeah, it gets to be how we start seeing people, right? Do we see them as a giving unit? Do you see them as, hey, there's an image bearer, right? When someone walks in the door, would feel like the lens we begin to see someone. Hey, here are even the words of Jesus, become my family and friends over time. Now, if you have a portfolio oftentimes a portfolio gives you a snapshot, usually at your financial situation, right? And your portfolio would tell you have, you know, I think for me, when I do this exercise, it's like, how do we live for a better bottom line or a bigger one, right? And so part of what we get to see is, I want us to pretend, I mean not pretend, but this is what you're given. You have 17 gold bars that you are going to put in that my life now. So you only have 17 of them to put down. And this is the assessment of where you feel like you're currently at. If I were to look at my life and say, hey, spiritual capital, you know, I might, you know, whatever. It's like, I'm going to give myself 2. And relationally, boy, I feel really connected to people. I have lots of family and friends. I'm going to give myself 5. You know, financial capital, and I'm so poor I can't even afford the R. I'm po. You know, like it's like I got 1 down there, and you only get 17 total. So this is tough because you have to use math. Okay, but I believe in you, and I want you to look at, hey, what would it look like right now? Assessment of your life. If you came into Fidelity and sat down, and they were giving you the life portfolio. Hey, you have 17 gold bars currently present in your life. Mark those out. Give you 5 minutes. Seem good? Good? Anyone just want to give a quick observation? Anything that, just from getting a look at it?
He and I are exactly the same.
You're the same? All right.
Yeah.
Nice.
And for both of us,
The physical is the worst.
the relational, we gave, both of us, independent, we gave the spiritual 4 bars and relational 5.
Mm-hmm.
Not proud of that.
Yeah. Good. It's good to get a snapshot where you're at. Anybody else?
Yeah, I had a spiritual capital 3, relational capital 4, physical capital 4, intellectual capital 3, and financial capital 4.
Yeah. Or you may have thought to yourself too, like, boy, pre-pandemic, this is where I would have put myself. Some people have these proud moments of the pandemic, right? I mean, like, for my wife would say, that's the most I've exercised in my entire life through a pandemic. And it's like, yeah, not so much for me, you know? It's and so some people felt like this was an opportunity for us to live into. Others feel like, boy, relational felt like a loss. Feels like I've lost so much during this season. Whatever. I'm not telling your story, just some of my own. Anybody else? Just observation?
Just to your point, Alzheimer's, because I put mine lower for relational because of that point.
Yeah.
I feel like I lost some friends.
Yeah.
Or like some that were close or not. We're still acquaintances.
Yeah.
It just feels different.
Yeah. Where you see them like, we're still good, right? Like, like I haven't seen you forever, you know? Just on Zoom. Yeah.
I think the pandemic personally gave me more time to focus on people.
Yeah.
And myself. But yeah, it gave me more time to focus on that relationship, intimate relationships with people, because you kind of got the people that took off, right?
Yeah.
But you kept your core group, or like the people that really like you felt like God was putting in your heart to be like, search for them, call them, do stuff with them, Zoom, whatever, go on walks really separate from each other.
Yes.
So for me, relational was really, it's been thriving.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah, I had a tough one with this, but I put financial capital as my lowest. I mean, praise God, we've been able to pay all the bills, and
Yeah.
we live in San Diego
Yeah.
Yes.
as a church planter.
Yeah.
It's just, part of me is just thinking about with inflation, what's happening with you know, how are we gonna get a house, like, all that, what's gonna happen in 5 years. I
Mhm.
put that as my lowest. And
Yep.
started thinking maybe I should start a barbecue business, you know.
Incredibly lucrative, yeah.
Dirkse Company. Might have to do a tofu business.
Yeah, there we go, there we go. So let's do this. Everyone doesn't need to declare your own, but if you were just to ask maybe that first question on the bottom, hey, what capital needs to increase the most? Again, we're looking for Commonwealth, so this is not the Sunday school answer, where you say
I know
spiritual capital. Like, maybe that's not where you're at, right? So there might be just, one last thing before we move on. This is what I want you to do as well, from the ones you already wrote down. So the ones you wrote down, you may have had yours marked out. You should have had more up here. But next to each one, I want you to feel like where you're currently at, does it feel like this is currently increasing? Does it feel like you're currently kind of stagnant? Or does it feel like it's kind of going down right now? So just walk through each one of those. All right. Good? So I want us to do like a visioning exercise now, which feels like picture yourself 2 years from now. I think one of the things I've found is that I overestimate what I can do in 1 year, and I underestimate what I can do in 2. And so I overestimate what I can do in 1 year. I feel like everything's going to be different in the church. It's going to be amazing, this and that. And then I usually get there and I'm pretty disappointed because we didn't get near as much progress as I thought. But I'm many times surprised of like what takes place in 2 years. And so I want you to imagine your life 2 years from now and begin to look at, you have been given 17 more. Okay?
So we have 34
We
now?
don't get like 2 more.
Oh my God.
So you have 17 that's already written on there, correct? That's what you just did? 2 years from now, I want you to add 17 more to this list. Where would you like those to show up? To feel like if you were to hand someone your portfolio 2 years from now and they'd look at it like, hey, here are the things that grew over the last 2 years. And again, if you have a lack, you probably want to increase the lack, right?
Yes.
A financial lack is still a lack. If you don't have it, someone else is supporting in that area.
It's weird to think for me in 2 years, I can't use 17.
What do you mean?
I mean, to add 17 more, I would be saying something about myself that I don't think is true.
Why is that?
Gauging from where I am and where I think I would be in 2 years. I guess I'm 60 now, so I'm maybe seeing it through those lenses, but I don't. It's kind of makes me want to go home and think about this because
Yeah.
I wouldn't put 17 more down.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
I could do it, but it wouldn't be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's good. I mean, it's part of it for us to think about, hey, what does it look like for us even to be wanting to live the good life, right? Wanting to feel like, God wants to provide abundantly more than we can ask or imagine. And so it's like, I couldn't imagine doubling this. Well,
And I think
it's
the
a,
challenge to labor that point again to your ability. What has God given you?
yeah,
Right? And so the 34 might be a daunting thing to look at, but what has God given you? He's given you finances, He's given you intellect, He's given you your physical health and time.
mm-hmm.
He's given you relationships, and He's given you your faith. Given you Himself.
This is really what Matthew 25, what we just looked at, right? So it's like, if you've been given 17 gold bars, if the master comes back in 2 years, And it's like, hey, how'd that go?
Yeah.
You know?
It's good.
What are people seeing? Are there places you're looking to double, triple? Are there I mean, what's some observations? I'll start with observations instead. What are you seeing as things that you desire 2 years from now?
I didn't put anything up on financial.
I didn't either.
I feel like that's the least important. And because I'm doing well, I'm doing okay,
Yeah.
right? So God is faithful there. But I just feel like the physical is my lowest, and it's always the part of me that I neglect. And and I just broke it up evenly, I guess, from there on. Intellectual capital, I'm in seminary right now, so it's just like, in 2 years, I'd love to drop all that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And then relational capital. This is like in a down right now, just because of some things going on in the church, but I feel like I need to double down on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And put 5 bars in that one.
Mm-hmm.
And I just doubled down on spiritual capital too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I just need to deepen my relationship with Jesus in the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah. That's good. I mean, financial capital is really fascinating, right? Because part of it too is the Bible talks 10 times more about finances than about faith. It doesn't mean that it's not talking about faith when it talks about finances, but finances show up more often, oftentimes because it's pointing to something larger that's going on. But to feel too like, yeah, we don't want to ignore it. We also don't want to overemphasize it. We had a prayer night last night. It is, it's a real prayer request for a lot of people in our community of like, I can't make rent, and this is really stressful. And I think when you have a lack of financial capital, it's very stressful. But we also find that this is an old study, and might not be a Southern California study, but I think the old study would say, well, money does provide a certain level of happiness, but it doesn't after a certain amount, which $75,000 was like, once you go over, there's almost there's no positive return that you have if someone makes $75,000 or you make $125,000 or you make $500,000. It's like, hey, you have a cap. But there could be a high level of stress when you're only making $30,000 living in Southern California trying to pay your rent, right? This is like high stress time. And we also see loads of stuff of like, financial, if giving things away is part of the deal on it. So yeah, go ahead.
It's been interesting with moving on up the spectrum. Like, cause I wanted to double my financial capital, more than double it. But I think for good reasons. Like I'm seeing living in kind of a condo apartment life. It's been great for ministry, but it's often very transient. And people are there for 6 months to a year. You can't really put down roots and start to develop deep relationships with people. It's often kind of a hit and go. And as a church planner, I would love to try to put down roots in a community. And so buying a home, I know as reasonable as it sounds right now, it sounds like it's been like my God-sized prayer request. It's wealthy, businessman in Bakersfield that owns, oil fields, which is buy me a home.
Basically, need
Yeah.
that now to buy a home in San Diego. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Pat, for me, I would say, of the first part of the exercise, you guys forgive me, man, I have a Pentecostal background, so I'm heavy on the spiritual.
There you go.
Side. So I had a 5 on the spiritual, and then I had a 5 on the intellectual capital, the creativity and concepts. I have very creative.
Yeah.
My lowest was the financial capital, and then the physical capital as well, and then the relational capital was in there. And then it's interesting, on the first 2, I had up arrows, so I want to increase in the spiritual, increase in the relational. I got the horizontal on the
physical, and then on the intellectual and financial, those are trending downward. Actually, the intellectual is actually probably, if we're talking about creativity and concepts, it's probably on a balance. I'm full of vision, but being
Yeah.
a small church pastor,
Yes.
sometimes, well, most of the time, our vision outweighs our capacity to fulfill
Yeah.
the vision, to see the vision come to pass, which is where the relational comes in. So I definitely want to increase the relational. I'm here with my buddy and my friend, and partner in ministry and kingdom building, because of the relational aspect that was deepened through the pandemic.
Yes.
So the relationship we had before the pandemic, and the pandemic, and then the social unrest and all the things. For the record, what we did, we put together a weekly conversation about racial reconciliation within the church.
So good.
Composed of multicultural background. So I called all my white friends
Mhm.
and a few of my black friends and said,
Yep.
let's get on the phone call and talk about all of these issues that nobody can seem to have a civil conversation about, and let's lay it on the table and come to talk in a kingdom-minded perspective. So in that way, the relational aspect increased, and I wanted to continue to increase, because now we're here today because we're at a point where we've taken the conversation, which led to fellowship. So we've actually had events with our churches, both small churches, join together to do events together.
That's great.
Proximity breeds intimacy, right? So we
Mhm.
created intimate relationships, and we got a bunch of stuff planned just to do connected, which I think is a part of the lifeblood of the new church now. Is that we have to rely on each other more than we ever have to continue to thrive and
Yes.
advance God's kingdom. But now we've taken it to the third leg of what we're trying to do is now let's do kingdom work together. Let's go out into the community and show what the kingdom looks like in the community as we join forces together, which is beneficial because what our church couldn't do by itself, we partner with this church, and then we have a couple other churches with like-minded vision. Now we're able to accomplish the vision that was set, and we're checking a lot of boxes as we're going along. So we're increasing our capacity to do so, and then on top of that, provision comes from heaven, the manna from heaven. The provision comes because we're God guys. He provides. And going back to how we were stating this before, is we can't put the cart before the horse. We have to seek purpose. So I see the spiritual, when we seek purpose and seek a vision that's truly God inspired, then I'll put it like this. This past week I did a funeral for a 16-year-old young man. And all of the testimonies that kept coming up, they were talking about how this young man was trying to get the bag. You from Compton, so I know what getting the bag means, right? So he was always fixated on trying to get money and all of this stuff. And one of the messages I try to convey is we don't have to chase the money. When we chase after purpose, the money will find us. The provision will find us. So truly, and it's a difficult concept to comprehend from where I come from and the way I was raised, because we need money to eat, so
no doubt.
That becomes the focus on everything. But as we go deeper into these capitals, we begin to unravel that money is not our primary goal in life. It's the spiritual is where we're trying to get to, and it's true for the people that we're serving, right? Like, no matter where we're serving, like, we're trying to get people to understand.
Yes.
And Jesus certainly was doing the same thing, right? He was meeting physical needs to access the spiritual needs, which is the ultimate need of everything. So as I look at where I want to be, and as brother was speaking here, I see that where I want to grow is spiritually, but I also want to grow financially to match my spiritual. And what I'm thinking of is not financially for selfish reasons, but I'm thinking of Solomon. I'll give you anything, Solomon. What do you want? Well, I want wisdom. So I want the spiritual to be intact first.
Mm-hmm.
And then since you asked for that, I'm going
Yep.
to give you all the,
Yep.
I'm going to give you the money. Because now you understand the purpose for
Yep.
the financial.
No doubt.
And so that's kind of in a nutshell, in a big nutshell,
Yep.
of where I kind of see things lining up. On the second side of my sheet, I see balance. I want to be balanced in all of it. But the two places where I want to, where I really want to grow and match is I want my spiritual, my financial
Mm-hmm.
to be. They're actually, I think, the highest on my list to be, but
Yes.
financial for the right reason and for
Yep.
the right purpose. Because the more freedom I have financially, or the more resources I have, I don't need more visions.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
only put one extra block in vision. I got vision for days. If you want
Yep.
to borrow something, I can go some vision. You know, I can loan you some vision. I got vision for days. And sometimes
Sell
I
it?
think the Lord is tormenting me because I don't have the capacity to fulfill all of them.
Yes.
But where I do want to grow is I want the financial to match the spiritual because that's where the purpose is. Do I have what is the financial for?
Yep.
It's for a purpose. It's not just for me
good.
in my house, but to advance the kingdom of God. And,
Yeah.
and whether we want to admit it or not, the kingdom needs money
Mhm.
to operate because
Yeah.
that's the chosen currency
Yeah.
of this world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I think, and that's the right heart after. I mean, that gets to be, you're choosing spiritual capital and you're investing in these things so that you can use it in the other areas, right? I mean, it's like, this is exactly what you should be about. For me, grew up in Wisconsin, so I'm a Milwaukee Buck fan. I'm a Drew Holiday fan. I mean, Drew Holiday, if you don't know some of his work, does an amazing amount of work in the three cities he's been a part of, LA, Milwaukee, and New Orleans, and all around supporting him and Lauren supporting black-owned businesses, black nonprofits. And so he gave his entire pandemic check away for, which that's pretty significant. I mean, his entire time in the pandemic, all away to giving, which is like, I'm using my platform, just like you're saying, and this money is going to do a bunch of good for a lot of people. But kind of felt like, hey, my wife and I, we hit a cap of what finances mean to us. Now we find meaning in it by all that we give away, which feels like, hey, the way of Jesus. Just want to speak, we're going to run out of time. A couple things. If you want to grow your capital, that second to the last question is, what are your rhythms and routines? In Luke 4:16, I think it says that Jesus entered the synagogue as it was his custom. It's like it was his predictable pattern. You wanted to figure out where he was? Well, Sabbath day, you would have found him in the synagogue because that was his custom. So how we begin to grow our capital is we start creating a custom of going to the gym, taking a Sabbath, reading a book, taking a class, sitting down to meet more neighbors and family and friends. It's repenting and believing. It's what are our opportunities that we begin to grow these things because we make them a predictable pattern. I think we said this is hard. I think I've watched more people become bucket carriers than a digger of a well. And a bucket carrier is, you listen to a podcast and feel like, man, Tim Keller said this awesome thing. I'm going to bring that to my sermon and I'll share that. But it's like he spent all the time digging the well to connect to the living stream so that when he shares, he has it. And the temptation, I think, for us is to take the capital from other people that they've spent a lot of time working on. You talk about Pentecostal background. You spent nights in prayer. You spent times of, it's part of the predictable pattern. And so if we want to grow these things, it gets to be, how do you keep excavating? How do you keep digging? So that, you're surprised because, man, now there's 8 gold bars in this area. There was only 2 years ago, but it more than doubled. It's a huge growth that takes place. And so part of it can be, hey, what does it look like to start creating predictable patterns, rhythms and routines, so that we grow in the areas that we desire to see increase over time. Hey, love the work that you're doing. Love to hear some of the stories. I don't know all your stories of where you're at, but I got to hear some of the ideas that different people are going to be living into. Be encouraged. Seek the kingdom. Go for it. Know the only failing is not trying and not responding to the idea and the vision God already gave you to go and do it. And so look forward to hearing stories. If you want to connect with me at all, you want to talk, you want to get lunch, would love to make myself available on that. So.